Okay, let's start with the challenges. Maybe the first challenge when I work in those environments is the asymmetries between the players, the actors. Companies usually with a lot of capacity to get information, to plan, and the access that they have in decision-making processes are much more much more intense and more leveraged than communities. And the logic of action between them are very different. So how to work with the different times they have. The communities need different time for decision making and for agreements that the company has. And usually the state do not play an adequate role on compensating those natural asymmetries. Actually, usually the companies, because of their power and the influence they have in the above levels, sometimes they capture the decision-making process. On the other hand, Latin America is going through a very intense development process, basically on extraction and elaboration from the natural resources, and that need of developing the economy based on natural resource extraction put a lot of pressure on communities, and that's also a bias that is not good for conflict resolution. And then you have another type of cultural challenges in regards of the way the decision making traditionally is made, top down, hierarchical, the way that the decision makers feel that they incarnate the state or the company, so they make it too personal sometimes and too top down, and that doesn't give a lot of space for the collaborative processes to go on. And then also corruption. Corruption is a challenge because there are hidden agendas and maybe a process of consensus building that is behind the curtains and is it perjudicates it's against the public interest. So that's also a very, very important challenge for the mediator, particularly, that tries to foster a more open, transparent and horizontal processes. Maybe the third big challenge, it has to do with the mediator and the role of this third side role that pushes forward this type of dialogue, collaborative process, because we are new kids in the block, right? So it's very difficult to understand for the actors what's their stake here, you know, what they are agent from the enemy, you know. So those are challenges. Some are cultural, some are more structural, and some other are more dynamic in terms of these new environments where conflict arise and conflict need to be resolved. So those are some challenges. And in terms of the opportunities, there are many. Democracy is the only game in town, fortunately, in Latin America, and democracy gives a lot of oxygen to this type of processes, since the basics are participation. So, and that's something that is slowly getting into the mainstream, and the way the social actors think about how they have to be involved in decision-making processes. So that's a good potentiality, and also in Latin America there is this approach from the human rights field, you know, that's very strong due to the transition from the dictatorships to democracy, the human rights movement, and discourse and narratives. Also the development, local development or territorial development field also is very important, and the democratic, you know, democratic dialogue approach to problem solving is also getting not mainstream, but it's entering the scene with a lot of interest. And so the intertwining of development, human rights, and democratic dialogue creates a good environment for us to work. Also the results, when you see the peace processes or the intrastate conflict resolution efforts that use systematically dialogue and open and transparency and rights compatible approach, it works. It works, and that can give good signals in terms of okay, a pragmatic way to approach conflict resolution. Even though maybe I like or I dislike to be with the other, is that they can solve problems. You know, that these processes can really solve problems. And then also there is a growing consciousness about the need of changing the way we relate with the other, you know, in Latin America. New constitutions from the 90s until now that has given the rights, third generation, fourth generation rights to sectors that have been excluded or invisibilized, and that visibilization also allow us to work better in dialogue. And maybe just one note in regards of the judiciary reform. The basics of conflict resolution is access to remedy, access to justice, and we cannot be successful if we don't get that result. And justice system in Latin America has been very conservative and traditional, and not playing a good role in that sense in creating mechanisms to access to justice. And the reforms that they are going through, it's very interesting, the effects, because it gives a lot of space to non-confrontative, they give alternatives to litigation. And that also gives a good space for us to work. Well, I wouldn't say there is a unique way for conflict resolution in Latin America in general. There are some trends that you can identify. We have a very personalistic, patrimonialistic culture. And there is usually in decision making and in conflict resolution there is a lot of incidents from the power-based approach. I have the power, I can impose myself over you because I have the power, then I do it. And that's maybe okay from a certain perspective, very pragmatic. But at the same time, there are some particular capacities in Latin America because of the youth of the societies compared with India or Asia in general, that create some horizontality at the same time. There is, in Latin America, there is a lot of attention and a lot of importance in trust building, personal trust, and that's bad because maybe it gets too personal. But the good thing is that it challenges the typical northerner way to approach conflict resolution, that is interest-based, you know, and it demands from mediators the capacity to build trust with the role, and that challenges again the concept of neutrality, for instance. You know, it demands from the mediator, from the third-sider, a position in regards of the structural agenda. So that's how you build trust, because you feel the other that you're close, you're empathic. And that's something that is quite, I don't know if it's unique only for Latin America, but for sure it's a new school that is emerging compared with the northerner, more interest-based, rational approach. And that has implications towards the way the mediator legitimates itself and sustain that legitimacy all throughout the process. Of course, that when you have a racist, hierarchical environment, it's very difficult to foster this type of processes because of there is no room for dialogue. You know, when I talk with somebody that is below me, I teach him or I punish him, but I don't talk with him. So those are some challenges in regards of the culture. But at the same time, I insist, Latin America, because maybe of the role of the state in building the society, it's also introduced the need of the inclusion of a theory of state in conflict resolution. From the north, we receive a framework that focuses on company, community, dialogue, relation, conflict prevention, grievance mechanisms, company, community. And in Latin America, you need to include the state. You need to include the state because many of the agreements that you can have out from community and company dialogue, they have to be rights compatible. And the only one that can really assure that is the state. But again, there's a really difficult time, we get a very difficult time to include the state in that triangle, you know? But again, when that happens, it works. I think there are the more intense and maybe violent conflict in Latin America you see when there is no state, actually. When the private sector and the communities just clash, you know, with those asymmetries that we were talking about, with no regulation from the state, from the normative, from the law, you know, so the first challenge is the strengthening of the state in its conflict prevention capacity. If you if you democratize the way that public decision making is done, including early in the process the different voices of the affected parties, then you will have not only wiser decisions but also conflict prevention approach, you know, because conflict brings change, as my teacher Eddie Kaufman said. So that's one need, the need of strengthening the democratic state institutions. The second need for capacity building is to build endogenous knowledge regarding our own conflicts, trends, and the different roles we should play, and with our setting, our regional settings. We import too much, you know, from other settings that we can learn from, but I think the knowledge development is something that's very important. You know, there are a lot of cases, good cases, but not enough comparison, you know, extractive lessons learned, and also the need of consolidating the role of the facilitator. We still are new and difficult to understand yet. So if Latin America builds up schools of facilitators, you know, education, postgraduate courses, professional associations, regional professional associations of facilitators, then probably the field will mature itself and give and be able to bring more capacity in the regional to prevent and resolve conflicts. And then maybe to finalize more from a regional perspective, all the intergovernmental networks or regimes such as UNASUR, Mercosur, the UNDP, those are institutions that if they develop capacities within it, institutional capacity to address interstate or intrastate conflict, they will be much effective, more effective to deal with social conflicts that can tend or derive to authoritarian solutions. And so maybe building their capacity to prevent conflicts from a regional perspective that will give the region more stability and more capacity to plan and to coexist.